The sky over the research facility turned green, not the green of a sunset or a storm, but the bright, unnatural green of alien ships cutting through Earth's atmosphere. Dr. Lisa watched from the observation tower as three massive vessels descended toward her compound. The ground shook. The alarms screamed, and Emma, her 8-year-old daughter, was still outside in the Animal Education Center. Lisa did not think, she ran. The commander stood in the bridge of the lead ship and looked down at the small settlement below. His scanners showed primitive defenses and almost no military presence. The humans below were scattered, disorganized, and afraid. They were exactly what he expected from a lesser species. His orders were clear: secure the human child for genetic study, collect biological samples from the local creatures, and leave. This operation would take maybe 10 minutes. The soldiers deployed from the landing ships in perfect formation. Their armor was sleek and black, their weapons advanced beyond anything Earth had ever seen. They moved without sound, without hesitation. They were the elite of the military, trained to handle any resistance. But they had never fought on a before. They did not understand what that meant. Lisa reached the outdoor education center and found Emma standing near the fence, watching the ships with wide eyes. The girl was not crying. Not yet. Lisa grabbed her daughter and pulled her toward the nearest shelter, moving as fast as her legs could carry her. Behind them, the soldiers were setting up energy barriers around the compound. Was in the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center when the invasion started. He was a good man, the kind of man who spent his days caring for wounded animals. He had dedicated his life to saving creatures that most people forgot existed. One of those creatures was Marshall, a honey badger that had arrived at the facility 3 years ago with a broken leg and an attitude that had never changed, even after healing. Marshall was small. A honey badger typically weighed between 20 to 30 pounds, but the animal was pure muscle and pure rage. Honey badgers did not run from danger. They did not hide or surrender, they fought. And they won more often than not. Marshall had bitten through steel cages. Marshall had fought off handlers twice his size. Marshall had never learned the word fear. When the energy weapons began blasting through the facility walls, heard the sound before anything else. It was not the sound of an animal panicking. It was the sound of an animal hunting. The honey badger's nose caught the scent of the alien soldiers. Its ears picked up the vibration of their heavy footsteps, and something deep inside its ancient brain recognized a threat to its territory. Lisa reached the basement of the main building just as the doors sealed behind her. She held Emma against her chest, her hands shaking. The girl was asking questions that Lisa could not answer. Will they hurt us? Are we going to die? What do they want? Lisa had no answers. She only had fear and the need to protect her child. The soldiers moved through the compound like hunters. They had scanned technology that showed them exactly where the humans were hiding. They had weapons that could cut through concrete. They had training and numbers and every advantage that mattered in the galaxy. But they had never faced Marshall. The honey badger hit the first soldier with the force of a small bomb. The creature had no fear because it had never needed to fear anything on Earth. Every predator that had ever tried to kill a honey badger had failed. Every enemy that had tried to take what belonged to a honey badger had been driven back. Marshall did not understand that these invaders were supposed to be superior. The badger only understood that the facility was its home, that was its caretaker, and that something was trying to take that away. The soldier fell. His armor was advanced, but the honey badger's claws had evolved to dig through concrete. Marshall found the gaps in the suit. The creature's teeth found the exposed flesh underneath. The soldier screamed. Received the report from his team and felt the first moment of doubt. One soldier injured, one creature, a small creature. The commander did not understand how this was possible. He reviewed the animal data from his scanners. Mass, 28 pounds, threat level, minimal, but his soldier was still screaming and the creature was still fighting. More soldiers moved in to contain the honey badger. More energy weapons fired. The creature was bleeding now, dark red marks on its fur, but the badger did not stop. Marshall fought with a fury that had no equal in the galaxy. This was what it meant to evolve on a. This was what happened when a creature survived in a place where everything was trying to kill you. You did not learn to run. You learned to fight with everything you had. Came running out of the facility, shouting at the soldiers, trying to distract them from the animal. He was a small man and he had no weapons, but he ran toward the danger because Marshall was more than just a rehabilitation animal. Marshall was proof that even the weakest, smallest creatures had strength. Marshall was family. The second soldier went down, then the third. The military was advanced and organized, but they were not built for a creature like this. They were built to fight other advanced species that followed rules. Marshall followed no rules. Marshall only knew survival and protection. Made the decision that his pride would hate. He ordered the soldiers to retreat. It was not a tactical choice. It was a choice based on the simple fact that his team was losing to a creature that weighed less than a human child. The commander had invaded countless worlds. He had never been forced to retreat before. The soldiers fell back to their ships, their wounded in tow. Chase Marshall lay on the treatment table while worked carefully around each wound. The honey badger was still angry. Its muscles were tight with rage that had not yet faded. Understood this. The animal had been in defense mode for the last hour. Adrenaline was still flooding through its body. But as cleaned the deepest cut on Marshall's left shoulder, the badger finally began to relax. The wound was deep. One of the alien energy weapons had burned through the creature's fur and skin, could see the raw flesh underneath. He worked with precision, applying the medical supplies that the facility kept on hand. He did not have technology that could match the invaders, but he had knowledge, skill, and a commitment to healing. These things, he knew, were more valuable than any weapon. Lisa sat in the facility's main office with Emma, watching the news feeds come in. The story was already spreading across the internet. Local news had reported the invasion. Within an hour, national news was covering it. Within 2 hours, international media was calling it the most significant event in human history. Lisa did not watch for long. She only wanted to make sure that Emma was safe, that the girl understood what had happened. Emma was asking questions about Marshall. The girl had seen the honey badger at the facility before. She had watched give educational talks about the animal's behavior and history. Emma wanted to know if Marshall was hurt badly. She wanted to know if the badger would survive. And she wanted to know why an alien invasion had stopped because of a small animal. Lisa did not have good answers. She only had the truth. Sometimes, she told her daughter, the things we do not expect are the things that save us. Sometimes, the smallest among us are the strongest. And sometimes, the best heroes are not chosen. They are simply acting on what they believe is right. Finished treating Marshall's wounds and stepped back to examine his work. The honey badger would survive. It would scar. But it would live, sat on the edge of the treatment table and looked at the creature that had just saved human lives. The badger opened its eyes and looked back at him. There was recognition there was intelligence, and there was something deeper, something that transcended species. Made a decision in that moment. Marshall was not just a rehabilitation animal anymore. The badger was a hero. The world would know this truth. The news spread across the planet at light speed. By the next morning, Marshall's image was on every screen. Videos of the creature fighting the alien soldiers were being played over and over. The honey badger had become famous. Millions of people who had never heard of honey badgers now knew their name. Millions of people understood for the first time that Earth had its own warriors, and they had always been here. The Empire received the reports through official channels. Commander stood before his superiors and relived the shame of his retreat. His soldiers had been driven back by a creature with a mass of 28 pounds. His military, the pride of the civilization, had been forced to withdraw. The explanation made no sense. Himself barely believed it. His commanding officer, General, was not satisfied with the basic facts. She wanted to understand what had gone wrong. She wanted to know how her best soldiers could have failed. Explain the honey badger's behavior, the creature's refusal to retreat, the way it had fought with an intensity that matched no animal in records. General listened carefully and then asked a question that changed everything. What if, she said, this is not an isolated animal? What if the entire species on that world is like this? Had not considered this possibility. He had thought Marshall was unique, an exception, a creature that had somehow developed beyond its normal capacity. But what if every creature on Earth was shaped by the world itself? What if the entire planet was raising warriors? The question spread through the military like a disease. Scientists were ordered to study Earth more carefully. Biologists examined the planet's dangerous climate, its extreme weather, its predators and harsh conditions. They began to understand something that their comfort-loving species had forgotten. The most dangerous creatures were not always the largest. Sometimes, the most dangerous creatures came from places where survival was a daily battle. Across Earth, humans were responding to the invasion attempt with a unified voice. Governments called emergency sessions. Scientists requested protection agreements. Military leaders demanded the right to defend their world. And everywhere, people were talking about Marshall. They were talking about a small creature that had done what all the advanced technology and military training had not done. The badger had stopped an invasion. Emma asked her mother if she could visit Marshall. Lisa arranged the visit carefully. The facility was being heavily guarded now by military personnel, but allowed Emma and her mother to come. The girl walked slowly to the treatment table where the honey badger rested. Marshall's eyes opened as the girl approached. The badger was not afraid. The creature had proven that fear did not exist in its world. Emma reached out her hand and nodded permission. The girl's small fingers touched the badger's soft fur, and for a moment, two creatures of Earth made a connection that would define an era. Emma whispered to Marshall, thanking the badger for protecting her. She told the creature that she understood what it had done. She told Marshall that the whole world now knew that sometimes the smallest defenders were the strongest. Marshall made a low sound in its throat, almost like purring. The honey badger closed its eyes again and seemed to smile. Watched the girl and the animal and understood the profound truth they shared. Both were small in a universe filled with giants. Both had faced something that should have destroyed them, and both had refused to surrender. Both had fought. Both had won. The news of Emma's visit spread quickly. Images of the girl touching the honey badger became the most viewed content across every platform. People cried. People cheered. People began to understand what it meant to be human on a dangerous world. They understood that their species had learned something that comfort-living species could never learn. They had learned to protect what they loved, no matter the cost. The council chamber was the largest meeting room in the galaxy. Thousands of representatives from 1,000 different species sat in concentric circles, each one representing a civilization that had reached the stars. They had gathered to hear the report of the invasion of Earth. Commander stood at the center, wearing his dress uniform, and prepared to deliver the most embarrassing moment of his career. Spoke without emotion. He explained the objective. He explained the deployment. He explained the tactical approach and the expected outcome. And then he explained the failure. His soldiers had been driven back by a single animal weighing less than 30 pounds. The council chamber fell silent. The representatives from 1,000 species did not know how to respond. The representative, ancient and wise, asked the first question. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched species advance to technology that seemed like magic. But he had never heard of a military force retreating from anything so small. Was the commander certain, he asked, that the creature was not some kind of advanced biological weapon? Had to answer no. The animal was natural. It had evolved on the planet Earth over millions of years. It was simply a honey badger adapted to survive in a harsh environment. The creature had developed the traits necessary to live on it, that was all. The council erupted in argument. Some species insisted that Earth must be quarantined immediately. Others demanded that a larger military force be sent to complete the invasion. Still others wanted to study the creature and understand how something so small could defeat soldiers. In the middle of the chaos, one representative stood and requested the floor. Dr. Lisa appeared on the communication screen. She was a human woman and she was asking to speak to the Galactic Council. This was unprecedented. Lesser species did not typically address the council, but the council president, moved by curiosity, allowed her to speak. Lisa did not speak about the invasion. She did not demand protection or make threats. Instead, she told the story of Marshall. She told the council about an animal that had been rescued from the brink of death. She told them about a creature that had been cared for by humans who believed that all life had value. She told them about how that creature had protected its human family not because it had been ordered to do so, but because it understood the meaning of loyalty. Lisa explained something that the advanced civilizations had forgotten. On Earth, creatures learned from birth that survival meant protecting those around you. Earth's climate was harsh. Earth's predators were deadly. Earth's world did not give mercy to the weak. So the creatures of Earth had learned something that comfort-living species could not understand. They had learned that true strength came not from technology or numbers, but from the willingness to stand and fight for what you loved. The honey badger, Lisa explained, was simply following the instincts that Earth had taught it. The creature had not been enhanced. It had not been trained as a weapon. It had simply reacted with the courage that all Earth creatures possessed. And that courage was something that no amount of advanced technology could defeat. The council chamber was silent when Lisa finished speaking. The representatives from 1,000 species sat in shock. They had always believed that civilization meant moving beyond the savagery of survival. They believed that technology and advancement made a species superior. But Lisa had just shown them something different. She had shown them that a creature shaped by hardship could possess a kind of honor that no amount of advancement could create. The representative spoke again. He asked Lisa a single question. In your assessment, he said, is this honey badger exceptional, or is this typical of creatures from your world? Lisa did not hesitate. She answered honestly. Every creature on Earth is like this, she said. Every animal has learned to survive by fighting. Every species has learned to protect its own. The honey badger is simply the most visible example, but the strength that you saw is something that all Earth creatures possess. It is the strength that comes from a world that does not reward weakness. The council erupted again, but this time with a different energy. The representatives were not angry or defensive. They were fascinated. They were terrified. They were beginning to understand something that would change the course of galactic history. They had just encountered a species that possessed something they had never seen before. They had encountered genuine honor. Sat in the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center and watched the council transmission on a small screen. He was not interested in politics or diplomacy. He was only interested in Marshall. The badger was recovering well. The wounds were healing. The creature was eating again and moving around the treatment area with its normal aggressive confidence. Knew that in a few more weeks, Marshall would be ready to leave the facility. But the world had changed around the badger. Marshall was no longer just a rehabilitation animal. The creature had become a symbol of Earth's strength. Humans who had never thought about honey badgers before were now learning about them. Children wanted to know why such a small animal was so fierce. Scientists wanted to understand the biological basis of the badger's fearlessness. Military leaders wanted to study how the creature fought. Emma was still visiting Marshall every day. The girl had become famous too. Images of her touching the badger's head were being shared across the galaxy. The child had become the face of human compassion on a dangerous world. She was proof that humans were not just warriors. They were also caretakers. They protected not just themselves, but all creatures around them. The Empire faced sanctions from the Council. Trade agreements were suspended. Diplomatic relationships were frozen. The penalty was not for the invasion itself. The penalty was for the incompetence that the invasion had revealed. They had tried to take what did not belong to them, and they had failed. In the eyes of the galactic community, failure against something so much weaker was unforgivable. General ordered a full review of the invasion attempt. She wanted to know Emma sat beside Marshall's recovery space in the specialized facility that had been built to house the badger. The creature was healing well. Most of the wounds had scabbed over. The deep burn on the left shoulder was still angry and red, but said it was getting better every day. Emma had been visiting the animal every afternoon after school. It had become her routine, her normal. She would sit with Marshall and talk about her day. On this particular afternoon, Emma asked Marshall a question that would change everything. She did not know how important the question was. She was simply a child trying to understand what had happened. But the question was so simple and so direct that it would become famous. Emma asked, did the aliens think I was easy prey because I was small? Did they not know that we fight back? A camera was recording. A journalist had been allowed to film the girl and the badger as part of a story about recovery and healing. The camera captured Emma's question clearly. It captured the moment when the child put her small hand on the badger's head and looked into its eyes with complete sincerity. Marshall did not answer with words. The creature never answered with words, but the badger's eyes seemed to look at the girl with understanding. The two of them sat together, the small child and the small animal, and something passed between them that the camera could not record. It was recognition. It was acknowledgement. It was the understanding that came from being small in a world that had taught you to be strong. The video spread across the galaxy within hours. Emma's question was translated into 1,000 languages. It was discussed in academic circles and military academies. It was analyzed by philosophers and psychologists. But the simple truth remained. A child had asked why anyone would think that a creature from a would-be easy prey. Lisa watched the video of her daughter with tears in her eyes. She had always known that Emma was special, but she had not known until this moment how profound her child's understanding was. Emma had captured something essential about humanity and about Earth itself. She had captured the truth that the galaxy needed to hear. The commander watched the same video in his assigned quarters on a remote station. He watched the small girl place her hand on the badger's head. He heard her ask the question, and for the first time since the failed invasion, understood what had gone wrong. It was not that the creature was stronger or faster or more skilled. It was that the creature understood something fundamental about survival on it. The creature knew that it was supposed to fight. The creature knew that it was supposed to protect. The creature knew that retreat was not an option. And because the creature knew these things, the creature had possessed a kind of power that no amount of training could match. The creature had possessed the power of absolute conviction. It spent his entire military career advancing through ranks by following orders and demonstrating competence. He had never possessed absolute conviction. He had never been willing to sacrifice everything to protect something he loved. He had always calculated odds and made decisions based on probability and advantage. And because of this, he had failed against a creature that had neither calculation nor advantage. The badger had only conviction. Received an official letter from the Galactic Council. He had been offered a position as the director of an animal relations facility. Humans would work with creatures from dozens of different worlds to study behavior and evolution. Would be in charge. The letter explained that his work with Marshall had demonstrated an understanding of how creatures could bridge the gap between species. Read the letter and immediately thought of Marshall. The badger was the one who had done the real work. The badger was the one who had taught the galaxy about honor and sacrifice, had simply been there to help, but he accepted the position. He understood that this was his opportunity to spread the message that Marshall had started. He would work with other species to show them what Earth creatures had always known. Emma began to receive requests for interviews. News organizations from across the galaxy wanted to talk to the girl who had asked the simple question that had changed everything. Lisa had to protect her daughter from too much exposure. Emma was still a child. She still needed to go to school and play and be normal. But Lisa also understood that Emma had become something else. Emma had become a symbol. The symbol was simple. The symbol was that small did not mean weak. The symbol was that vulnerable did not mean powerless. The symbol was that a creature that had learned to fight could teach an entire galaxy something important. Emma carried this symbol without even knowing she was doing it, but the galaxy understood. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. The president of the council, the Ancient, made an announcement that had never been made before. Earth would receive a formal apology from the Empire. It was unprecedented. No major civilization had ever apologized to a lesser species. But the council voted unanimously. The apology was not for the invasion itself. The apology was for underestimating a world that had taught its creatures to fight. They sent the apology through official channels. It was recorded and broadcast across the galaxy. Commander delivered the message himself. He stood in his dress uniform and spoke directly to the humans of Earth. He apologized for his failure to understand what Earth truly was. He apologized for thinking that small creatures could be taken easily. He apologized for not recognizing the honor and strength that came from a. His apology was not accepted immediately. Many humans wanted more than words. They wanted guarantees. They wanted protection. They wanted respect. And slowly, through years of negotiation and agreement, they got these things. But the apology was important because it represented a shift in how the galaxy viewed Earth and all creatures from harsh worlds. Emma was 12 years old when she delivered a speech to the Galactic Council. She stood before representatives from 1,000 species and spoke about what it meant to live on a. She spoke about her mother who had fought to protect her. She spoke about who had healed an Ani 10 years after the invasion. The galaxy had changed. The economic sanctions against the Empire remained in place, but they were no longer harsh. They had worked hard to rebuild their reputation. They had opened their military academies to students from other species. They had invested in research programs. They had become, in many ways, a different civilization. But they would never fully recover from the shame of being driven back by a honey badger. Across the galaxy, species that had once focused entirely on technological advancement began to reconsider their values. They looked at their own worlds and their own creatures. They began to understand something that they had always known intellectually, but never truly grasped emotionally. They began to understand that survival on a harsh world created strength that could not be replicated in laboratories. They began to understand that there was honor in simplicity. There was power in sacrifice. There was wisdom in protecting what you loved above all else. Dr. Lisa stood at the dedication ceremony for the Understanding Center. The building was massive and beautiful. It had been constructed on the grounds of the original research facility where everything had started. The transparent walls allowed visitors to see into the various educational spaces. Exhibits detailed the history of honey badgers, the biology of Earth creatures, and the story of Marshall. Stood beside Lisa. He was older now. His hair was gray. His hands were weathered from years of caring for animals, but his eyes were still bright with the same passion that had driven him to rescue Marshall all those years ago. had spent the last decade training researchers from 1,000 different species. He had taught them how to work with creatures that valued survival and honor. He had shown them that you could not force understanding. You could only create opportunities for it to develop. Emma was no longer a child. She was 16 years old, and she was beginning her own work as an environmental advocate. She traveled to different worlds and studied the creatures that lived on harsh planets. She wanted to understand what shaped them. She wanted to know the secrets that taught their inhabitants. Emma had become the bridge between Earth and the galaxy in a way that no diplomat ever could be. Marshall had lived to be 14 years old, which was well beyond the normal for a honey badger. The creature had spent its final years in the specialized habitat, its facility. Other creatures from harsh worlds had been brought to live near Marshall. A kraken from an ocean world that was almost entirely water. A desert dweller from a planet of sand and sun. A creature from a volcanic world that had learned to survive in temperatures that would kill most animals. They all lived in proximity to Marshall, and slowly observed them developing relationships based on shared understanding. The creatures from recognized something in each other that creatures from gentle worlds could not understand. They recognized survival. They recognized the willingness to fight. They recognized honor. Marshall had become a teacher to these creatures, showing them that they were not alone in what they had learned, that other creatures across the galaxy had been shaped by harsh worlds in the same way. The day Marshall died was sitting beside the creature. The badger was old now, its movements slow, but its eyes were still fierce, held the creature's paw and thanked Marshall for everything it had taught the galaxy. He told the badger that its story would never be forgotten. He told Marshall that every creature born on a harsh world from this point forward would understand that it was not alone. They would understand that there were others like them across the galaxy. Marshall's final act was to look directly into his eyes, and in that look there was peace. The badger had lived a full life. It had protected its family. It had changed the galaxy. What more could any creature ask for? The funeral was attended by representatives from dozens of worlds. A honey badger's death should have been unremarkable, but Marshall's death was treated with the same respect that would be given to the funeral of a great leader or a famous warrior. Because that was what Marshall had been. The creature had led a revolution not through words or politics, but simply by being true to what it was. Lisa held Emma's hand as they watched the memorial service. The girl was crying, but she was also smiling. Emma understood better than anyone what Marshall had been. She understood that the creature had never been trying to save the galaxy. The badger had simply been trying to protect its home. And in doing so, the badger had taught the entire galaxy a lesson about the value of home. 10 years became 20. The research facilities that had started expanded across the galaxy. Schools began teaching students about creatures from. The stories of Marshall and Emma became part of the curriculum on 1,000 worlds. Children from comfortable civilizations learned about the strength that came from harsh survival. They learned that technology was not the highest value. They learned that honor mattered more than advancement. The military academy installed a memorial to Marshall in its main courtyard. The statue was simple, showing the honey badger in a fighting stance. But above the statue was a plaque that read, "The smallest warrior can teach the greatest empires about honor. The empire acknowledges its failure and its respect." Emma, as an adult, returned to the original research facility where everything had started. She walked through the Animal Education Center and remembered being a girl playing here, unaware that her world was about to change. She walked to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center where Marshall had been cared for. The facility had been expanded and modernized, but the original treatment table where it healed the badger's wounds was preserved as a historical artifact. Emma sat in the observation area and watched the new creatures being brought in for rehabilitation. She saw an assistant working with an injured creature with the same patience and skill that had demonstrated. She saw the same respect for life that had always guided the facility, and she understood that Marshall's legacy was not just about a single animal. It was about an entire philosophy of how creatures should treat each other. Lisa had written a book about her experience and the invasion. It was the most translated text in the galaxy. In it, she described what it meant to live on a. She explained how creatures learned from birth that weakness was a luxury they could not afford. She talked about how this shaped not just how creatures survived, but how they thought about loyalty, about family, about sacrifice. The book had changed how the galaxy approached everything from military training to educational philosophy. It had become required reading in schools across civilizations that had never known hardship. It had become the foundation of a new field of study, philosophy. 20 years after the invasion, the Galactic Council created a new award. It was called the Marshall Medal. It was given to individuals from any species who demonstrated exceptional courage, sacrifice, and commitment to protecting others. The first recipients were an Emma, but many others would receive it in the years to come. Every time the medal was given, it was a reminder of the honey badger that had taught the galaxy about honor. Commander was now retired. He lived on a quiet world far from the centers of galactic power. He had spent his later years writing books about his experience on Earth. He had become, in his own way, an ambassador for the philosophy. Young officers who wanted to understand what had happened at the invasion would seek him out for conversation, would tell them the simple truth. We underestimated something we did not understand, and that cost us more than victory would have gained. Emma returned to the research facility one last time when she was very old. She walked to the habitat where creatures from harsh worlds still lived together. She sat and watched them interact, and she understood something that Marshall had always known. The galaxy was not divided into superior and inferior species. It was divided into creatures that had learned to survive and creatures that had never had to try. The greatest wisdom was in learning from those who had fought hardest. The sun set over the research facility as Emma sat in the observation area. Somewhere in the galaxy, a young creature from a harsh world was taking its first step toward survival. Somewhere, a parent was teaching a child to fight for what mattered. Somewhere, a species was learning the lessons that Earth had been teaching for millions of years. And none of it would have happened without a small, fierce creature named Marshall who had decided that protecting its home was worth more than obedience to fear. A creature that had taught the galaxy that being small did not mean being weak. A honey badger that had changed the course of history not through power or politics, but simply by being true to what it was. The era of underestimation was over. The era of honor had begun. And it had all started with a child asking a simple question and a badger willing to fight. Mal that could have died. She spoke about Marshall who had fought for creatures that were not its own species. She spoke about humans and animals and the strength that came from a place that did not tolerate weakness. The council listened. The representatives from advanced civilizations that had forgotten the value of struggle listened to a human child teach them what they had lost. By the time Emma finished speaking, many of the representatives were crying. They were crying because they understood that they had built their civilizations on the wrong foundation. They had believed that technology and power were what mattered. But a child had shown them that what truly mattered was the willingness to stand and fight for what you loved. The military academy included Marshall's final battle in their training curriculum. They studied the fight frame by frame. They analyzed every movement, and they taught their soldiers that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was not the one with the most weapons. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one that had everything to lose and the conviction to defend it. Stood in his new facility and watched creatures from dozens of different worlds interact. An officer worked alongside a human scientist to study a creature from a harsh planet in the outer rim. It was slow work. It was difficult work. But it was work that mattered. It was work that was teaching the galaxy about honor. Every detail about how the operation had gone wrong. Scientists analyzed the video recordings frame by frame. They studied the honey badger's movements, its fighting technique, its refusal to acknowledge pain. And slowly, a picture emerged that troubled the military deeply. The creature was not exceptional. It was exactly what Earth creatures were supposed to be. And if that was true, then they had underestimated not just one animal, but an entire world full of animals like this. They had tried to invade a planet that had spent millions of years raising warriors, and they had failed. Was removed from command. It was not a punishment exactly. It was simply a reassignment to a position where he would never again encounter a species from a. The commander accepted this fate quietly. He had learned his lesson. He had learned that the most dangerous creatures were not always the ones with the largest weapons. Sometimes they were the ones with the most to protect. The Galactic Council voted unanimously on a new resolution. Earth would be designated as a. The Empire would spend the next weeks trying to understand Earth, but they would never fully grasp the truth. They could study the planet's geology and weather. They could examine the biological data of 1,000 creatures, but they could never understand the simple fact that had always been true. Every creature learned one lesson. Nothing worth having comes without a fight. Them to the landing zone, snarling and refusing to stop until the last alien vessel had lifted off the ground. The honey badger stood alone on the scorched earth, bleeding from 7 wounds, watching the ships disappear into the sky. reached the creature and carefully knelt beside it. Marshall's breathing was hard and fast. The badger's eyes were still fierce, still ready to fight if anything came back down. Began to check the injuries, his hands gentle and steady. He whispered to the animal, thanking it for what it had done. In the basement of the main building, the alarm stopped. Lisa heard the ships rising, felt the vibration of their departure. She held Emma and cried, not from fear anymore, but from the knowledge that they had survived. The girl looked up at her mother and asked a simple question: what saved us? Lisa did not have an answer yet, but somewhere on the compound, a honey badger was being cared for by a man who understood the truth. Sometimes the smallest creatures have the biggest hearts. Sometimes the most unlikely defenders save the day. And sometimes, when you underestimate your enemy, you lose. The Empire would learn this lesson across the entire galaxy.